Hello everyone, Amer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I'm doing Season 4, Episode 8, which is called Mastermind. So we start out with Jim going to an old-timey pirate ship for instructions. I guess it's part of some show or some kind of attraction. Anyway, the mission: Lou Merrick is a rising syndicate boss with a huge blackmail file on government officials, and the IMF must neutralize Merrick and his information. For this mission, we get the men, no female agent, but we get Dr. Berman, who is a friend of Jonas Stone, Merrick's superior, a pharmaceutical man named Galvin, Nurse Larkin, and as well as a window washing service. You'll see how that shakes out in a minute. So Barney joins the window washers outside the syndicate's office, and Willie joins Stone in the elevator. Willie is able to put a bug in Stone's pocket and also sprays him quietly with a specially prepared drug. Stone gets to his office and talks to Merrick about how the combination to the safe is still Stone's secret, and that Merrick wants to get into the narcotics racket, but the syndicate thinks it's too risky. Merrick's rival Nicholson arrives at the office with a message that a big meeting of the syndicate has been moved up by a couple of days. Neither Merrick nor Stone are very happy at this news. Jim arrives as Dr. Berman's associate, looking for some funds for his Brain Institute research, and Stone graciously agrees to donate $50,000. Suddenly, Stone falls to the ground, and Jim thinks it might be a stroke, summoning an ambulance with Merrick following. Barney raises the window washer up to the office window next to Stone's and is able to take off some of the glass, having to pause while the secretary enters the room, but manages to get in with some supplies. His first job is to set up a false wall he can hide behind. At the Institute, Merrick is told that Stone will be placed under Jim's care as he's the best in the field, and that Stone's mind is okay, but his motor functions seem affected. Their man Carson stays outside the hospital room as Paris and Nurse Larkin arrive, and Jim invites them in. Galvin arrives and expects to talk to Stone about the shipment, asking Merrick to convey a message to Stone that it is on schedule. Doesn't give Merrick any details. Willie calls Merrick and says he's Leshing, who Galvin referred to as involved in the deal, and asks Stone to call him. Merrick hears the hospital intercom in the background of Willie's call, thanks to a tape, tipping him off that something is quite amiss. Meanwhile, Barney works his way into the back of Stone's safe. Carson hears Jim and the nurse arguing about what's happening in the room and pops his head in, shocked to see that Jim has wired Paris up to Stone's life support apparatus and is referring to Paris as Stone. He immediately summons Merrick, who pushes his way in and demands answers. Jim says he's experimenting with transmitting thoughts through brainwaves, and Merrick says he's going to put a stop to it. But suddenly Paris calls out to Merrick in Stone's voice and tells him not to let the meeting be pushed up. Merrick rips the wires off of Paris's head, but Paris continues to talk to Stone for about another 10 seconds, then collapses. Merrick talks to Dr. Berman, who says he'll stop the experiments if that's what Merrick wants, but then Merrick thinks better of it, and he says he just doesn't want any other visitors going to that room. He hears Nurse Larkin on the intercom, recognizing her voice from the earlier call with Leshing, and asks if she can point him towards Mr. Leshing. He finds Willie Leshing working in the hospital lab, and clearly he's making heroin. Merrick says he's in charge of the deal now, and Willie grudgingly agrees to play along. Barney manages to get into the safe and empty the blackmail envelope, installing new tumblers while he's at it. Merrick returns to see Paris as Stone, pointing a gun at him and telling him he wants to confirm that he's actually receiving Stone's thoughts. Thanks to previous research, Paris knows all about Stone's past and is able to answer Merrick's questions. Paris as Stone confirms the deal with Galvin and Leshing and claims that the reason Merrick wasn't told because Stone didn't want any potential leaks until the deal was solid. And he says Merrick is of course going to share in the deal. Paris and Merrick discuss the details, and the operation is going to be financed with the money that's in the safe. Jim and Dr. Berman are listening through a bug, and Berman calls Nicholson, saying that he's concerned about what's going on under Merrick's orders. Nicholson heads over as Merrick tells Jim he's taking Stone with him for a while, and Paris as Stone agrees. Dr. Berman and Nicholson comes to Stone's room, and Berman, with fake shock, looks at Stone's chart, claiming that he's been drugged and there's nothing actually wrong with him. The real Stone is revived, and everyone is told that Dr. Jim has apparently left the hospital. Berman claims that Dr. Jim isn't involved with the Institute at all. He came with Stone to the hospital, he had a signed release by Merrick, so there wasn't anything that anybody could do about it, and Merrick agreed to the whole thing. Barney has to pause his work for a while as one of the men comes into the office to sneak some booze, as Merrick and Paris arrive. Paris begins to open the safe, but Barney gives him a small electrical shock to signal that he's not done his work yet. Paris feigns that his real self is taking over to buy some time for Barney, and eventually manages to open the safe as Galvin arrives for the cash. Barney signals the window washer to come up and get him, and Willie confirms everything is good, including a taped voice of the knocked-out Carson as further proof. Paris leaves a bug in the chair as Merrick decides that he's of no further use, even as Jonas, and tells his man Flynn to take care of Paris. Jim knocks out Flynn as Merrick discovers the empty pouch in the now open safe, and Stone and Nicholson arrive and look at the whole scene, with Stone berating Merrick for having lost the blackmail info and the money, as Merrick tries vainly to explain. The IMF hears a gunshot as they drive away. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of B-. I actually had it rated much lower during my initial kind of go through. I had it rated kind of down in the D area. I'm going to explain why I kind of changed it. Basically, my initial write-up was this. Poor Donnelly Rhodes again. Just like in The Freeze, the last time we saw him, he, as Merrick, gets victimized by futuristic medical quackery in this one. The fact that this strong, seemingly intelligent guy gets pitted against the IMF and turns himself into a complete schmuck so quickly is a perfect example of how to make a villain totally lame. This one at least forces the IMF to execute a slightly more elaborate and believable plan by cracking a safe with Merrick's files and Stone's money while keeping the bad guys busy. That's what I wrote initially. That was a couple of years ago. Now, some of what I said, I'm going to stick by. But I have to make some changes to some things here. First of all, let me start with what is the good in this episode and why I think it's much better than I originally thought. First of all, when I watched the con unfold here, or maybe better to say the IMF plot unfold here, it's actually a lot better than I originally remembered. It's a very, very precise plot. I think that's the best word, because it relies on really careful timing and execution, having the right person there or not there at exactly the right time. As an example, it's really neat how, towards the end, once Dr. Berman calls the Nicholson guy and tells him, hey, you better get over here and see what's going on. Merrick's up to something. He's able to explain to Nicholson and Stone, who have no idea what's transpired over the last few hours, and explain to them that, look, hey, Merrick came here with Stone, and, he put everybody all up to this, and the other doctor was in on it, and all of that kind of stuff. At the exact moment where Merrick is back at the office with Paris, and the IMF is able to just kind of pull that off with that really precision timing. And it really illustrates that there was some fantastic planning involved here. Okay? There's a counterpoint to that which will be coming up. But just the overall plot and the way it's laid out, I think for story-wise, it's actually really good. And visually, it's also quite neat. Also good, I really like the way that Barney worked. Getting him in, to the area where the safe is, that was really top notch. A great idea to kind of go in through the window and into the office and get into the safe and from the rear. They're actually going to kind of replay this idea in another episode that's coming up pretty soon. Again, like I said, visually very neat. Also, the little bits of improv along the way, like Barney. When he sees that Paris is opening the tumblers, but he's not quite ready yet. Giving him just that little electrical shock, and Paris realizing, oh, well, gee, I need to buy him some time. That was just a really, really nice touch, kind of on the fly. I really liked that. I also liked the way that the IMF actually, use kind of a very, very a cogent way to convince Merrick that Paris is actually Jonas Stone. They actually use little tidbits from their conversation that they got using the bug earlier to kind of bring everything together. Like they were able to, talk about how there was this message from the syndicate about the meeting being moved up a couple of days. They were talking about, mentioning and explaining how, after Stone, the real Stone, was so vehement about not allowing Merrick to get into the narcotics game, about how suddenly, now there's this deal involving narcotics. And, Paris as Stone explaining it very cogently is like, look, I couldn't tell you until the deal was solidified, couldn't have any leaks. That was a nice little touch. I really, really like that. Anyway, now moving on to what's not so good. As I said in my initial thoughts about this episode, this one is really a lot like the freeze from back in episode 3, where Donnelly Rhodes really, really does get fooled. And again, from the perspective of just looking at his character, him as an actor and him as a character, it's almost like a mirror image. You've got this guy who's very, very intelligent, just like he was in the freeze. He was a criminal in that one, and a very, very smart one. He had this plan about how I'm going to get past the statute of limitations and then I can collect my cash. And in this one, he also has this big idea. He's got a plan for, how to be the top dog in, his organization. But clearly he lacks wisdom. I called him a lame schmuck in my original, write-up for this. I've kind of softened my stance on that a little bit. He's definitely lame in the sense that I define lameness as being easy to manipulate because you're so, tunnel visionally minded, if that's a phrase. You're so focused on this one goal that you can't see outside this little kind of box that you put yourself in. And in this one, Lou Merrick is so focused on, I got to be the top dog. I don't like the fact that Jonas, doesn't, share all of this information with me. I'm ready and all of that kind of stuff. And then, and the IMF is just it's just so easy for them to use that and manipulate it and predict exactly what Merrick is going to do. Just as a for instance, Merrick could have kind of pulled himself out of the trap umpteen number of times during this episode. One of the key points is where he talks to Dr. Berman after learning what, Dr. Jim is doing, trying to use this brainwave experiment. He could, Dr. Berman said, I can stop the experiments if that's what you want. But Merrick just says, no, you know what? Why don't you let him continue? Because he realizes that maybe he can use this as an opportunity. Had he just said, yeah, you know what, Doc, I want this stopped, the jig would have been up. Maybe the IMF would have had contingency for that for that plan. They probably did, knowing Jim Phelps. But it would have at least kind of eliminated some of that lameness and schmuckery there. In this case, you can't say anything but Lou Merrick is completely knee-deep in lameness, for sure. Schmuckery is kind of a question of degree. Yeah, so put him in that category, definitely, of a very, very intelligent villain who just doesn't behave wisely and is really, really predictable to the point where the IMF is just really able to just make him walk through the steps. And it's just kind of so easy for them. I guess that's really what I would have to say about that. So nothing really too bad other than that aspect of it. Quality, it just turned out to not be such a difficult mission when you break it down like that. But other than that, I'll stick with my grade of B- on this one, just because I think that the story and the unfolding of the story is really, really quite good. And that's, I think, what I have to say about this one. Thank you as always for watching. Always appreciate it. Please like this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments. As always, I love to hear what you have to say. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.